Gary Hoy was a Canadian lawyer who died in 1993 after falling from the 24th floor of a building. He was trying to prove to a bunch of students that his windows were unbreakable, so he literally threw himself against one, which caused the window frame to give way and pop out. Another lawyer named Clement Laird Welling-Digham died in 1871 after accidentally shooting himself in the stomach while trying to demonstrate how a victim might have accidentally shot themselves. He was defending Thomas McGeehan on a murder case, and he used a gun that he thought was unloaded. Nevertheless, the point was proven and Thomas McGeehan was acquitted and released from custody, only to be shot to death 4 years later. The guy who invented Jack Daniels, Jasper Newton Daniel, died of blood poisoning after angrily kicking his safe, which caused an infection to start in his toe. Supposedly, he had always had trouble remembering the combination to his safe. Ancient Greek philosopher Diogenes has several possible causes of death. He could have died from holding his own breath, eating raw octopus, being bitten by a dog, or from pooping after eating bad fish. Another ancient Greek philosopher, Heraclitus, died after he was afflicted with dropsy, which is old speak for edema, and in an effort to remove the excess fluid in his body, he sat on a pile of cow poop, but he was trapped and eaten by a bunch of dogs. Prince Sado of Korea was a mentally unstable prince who would randomly murder palace staff without reason. His father deemed him unworthy to rule, but because of palace law, the king was prevented from executing his own son, so instead he ordered Sado to be locked inside a wooden rice chest, or he died of starvation after 8 days in 1762. In 1626, Francis Bacon became intrigued by the idea of using snow to preserve food. He purchased a chicken from a villager and attempted to stuff it with snow with his bare hands to see if it would remain fresh for longer. During the process, he became ill and died of pneumonia. He was an advocate for the scientific method and experimental reasoning, and he died conducting an experiment. In 1920, King Alexander was walking in the gardens of the Tatoi Palace near Athens when his pet German Shepherd got into a fight with the Barbary macaque, which is a type of monkey that belonged to a palace servant. In an attempt to break up the fight, the monkey bit him on the leg. Initially, the wounds did not seem serious. However, medical treatment at the time was limited and the bites soon became infected. Doctors debated amputating his leg but were reluctant, fearing the political consequences of incapacitating the king. He died of sepsis. Edgar Allan Poe's death is still a big mystery. He was found delirious, disoriented, and wearing someone else's clothes on the streets of Baltimore on October 3, 1849. He was taken to a hospital where he remained in a confused state for 4 days before dying on October 7, 1849. His official cause of death was recorded as congestion of the brain, which is a vague 19th century term that could refer to anything from alcohol poisoning to meningitis to a stroke. The cooping theory is one of the most popular explanations. Cooping was a 19th century practice where individuals were kidnapped by gangs and forced to drink alcohol and vote multiple times under different identities. Edgar's discovery near a polling place in cheap clothes supports this idea. He supposedly spent his final hours alive repeatedly calling out the name Reynolds, though nobody really knows who this Reynolds was. According to Greek historians, Draco, an Athenian lawmaker, made a public appearance at a theater in Aegina. In ancient Greek tradition, it was customary to throw cloaks, hats, and other garments onto honored figures as a sign of admiration and respect, which is similar to how modern audiences would throw flowers on stage. However, his supporters became so enthusiastic that they threw so many garments onto him that he was completely covered and suffocated to death under the weights of all the things. In 1927, Isadora Duncan, the famous American dancer, was a passenger in the Amilcar CGSS, which is a small open-top sports car in France. She was wearing a very long silk scarf, and as the car accelerated, the scarf became entangled in the spoked wheels and rear axle of the vehicle, causing the scarf to be tightened instantly, pulling her out of her seat and snapping her neck, causing strangulation and a fatal carotid artery injury. Some reports suggest that she died almost instantly, while others claim she did not. Basil Brown, a British health enthusiast, died in 1974 after consuming a lot of carrot juice, leading to severe vitamin A toxicity and liver damage. He was obsessed with health and nutrition, particularly the benefits of vitamin A and carrots. Over a 10-day period, he allegedly drank 10 gallons of carrot juice and consumed massive doses of vitamin A supplements. His skin turned a deep orange, which isn't that bad in and of itself, as the real danger comes from the vitamin A poisoning. He believed he was improving his health, but he accidentally ended up poisoning himself with what was supposed to be a beneficial nutrient. George, Duke of Clarence, was the younger brother of King Edward IV and a key figure in the Wars of the Roses. Edward personally ordered his execution after Parliament found him guilty of treason for conspiring against the king. According to tradition, George was executed by being drowned in a butt of Malmsey wine in the Tower of London. A butt was a large cask holding about 126 gallons of liquid. King Adolf Frederick of Sweden is remembered more for how he died rather than for how he ruled. In 1771, he ate an incredibly large meal that consisted of sauerkraut, lobster, caviar, smoked herring, champagne, and 14 servings of his favorite dessert called semla, which is a sweet pastry. He likely died from a stroke, heart failure, or fatal gastrointestinal distress from extreme overeating. During Alexander the Great's conquest, he encountered a gymnosophist, which is a naked philosopher named Calanus, who joined Alexander's army as they traveled back from India to Persia. By the time they reached Susa, which is modern-day Iran, the philosopher became sick and decided to burn himself alive. Before his death, he reportedly bid farewell to Alexander and predicted Alexander's own death soon after. Alexander died in 323 BC, less than a year later, making the prediction pretty accurate. Anyways, after Calanus' death, Alexander's soldiers held a massive funeral feast in his honor. In this celebration, they decided to do a drinking contest in which they consumed large amounts of undiluted wine. 42 soldiers died from alcohol poisoning, including the contest winner, who drank around 3.5 gallons of wine before dying. The irony here lies in the fact that Calanus died choosing discipline and self-dignity, as self-immolation was seen to be an honorable and noble way to die, and that the people who honored him died of indulgence. Another fatal drinking contest involved Jennifer Strange, a 28-year-old woman from California, who was found dead in 2007 after participating in a radio contest organized by KDND 107.9. The contest was called Hold Your Wee for a Wee, and it challenged participants to drink large amounts of water without peeing in order to win a Nintendo Wii. Participants were given water bottles every 15 minutes, and Jennifer drank around 1.5 gallons of water in a short period of time. After the contest, she complained of severe headaches and nausea, but instead of seeking medical treatment, she went home. She was found dead a few hours later in her home. Her cause of death was water intoxication. During the contest, listeners and on-air staff joked about the dangers of drinking too much water. However, the contest continued despite these warnings. In 2009, a jury awarded Jennifer Strange's family $16.5 million in damages. One of the radio hosts was the brother of Lori Vallow Daybell, who killed her own children. In 2009, 25-year-old Vladimir Likonos, a student at Kiev Polytechnic Institute from Ukraine, was killed by his own chewing gum. He was known for his habits of dipping chewing gum in citric acid for a sour kick. However, one day, he confused citric acid with a highly volatile explosive powder. Police investigating the scene found around 100 grams of the unidentified explosive, which is reportedly 4 times stronger than TNT. The powder was on his work table, which means it was probably used for his chemistry studies. It is believed the explosion was triggered either by the moisture of his saliva or the simple act of chewing on a gum mixed with the explosive powder. Bobby Leach was a British stuntsman and daredevil, best known for being the second person to survive a plunge over Niagara Falls in a barrel. By the way, the first person to attempt this stunt was a 63-year-old school teacher named Annie Edson Taylor. She did it for money, but unfortunately she ended up dying penniless 20 years later. In the past 124 years, thousands of people have been swept over Niagara Falls, but only about 16 people have survived it. Anyways, Bobby Leach ended up dying after slipping on an orange peel. The fall caused a severe injury in his leg, which became infected. Despite the medical attention and a leg amputation, he died shortly after. Tommy Cooper was a famous British stand-up comedian. In 1984, Cooper was performing live on TV on the show Live from Her Majesty's. During his act, he suddenly collapsed backward into the curtain. The audience was laughing, thinking it was all part of the play. However, he was suffering from a heart attack and nobody intervened because everyone thought it was a part of the show. He, as a comedian, literally died with his ears full of laughter from an audience. You can watch his final performance on YouTube. In 2010, Jimmy Heselden, the owner of Segway Inc., was riding a Segway near his home in England. While riding along a cliffside path, he lost control of the Segway and rode off a cliff, falling into the river wharf below. The irony in this situation is that Segways were supposed to provide stability and balance, but in this case, the Segway was unable to prevent him from falling off a cliff. Speaking of dying from your own product, in 1912, Austrian inventor Franz Reichelt invented what he thought was a safe and acceptable parachute. His invention was a combination of a coat and a parachute, with a design that folded up and deployed when falling. He did multiple tests with mannequins from varying heights. None of them actually worked, but he was still somehow convinced that if he jumped, it would somehow work. He went to city police for permission to jump from the Eiffel Tower as a test. They let him jump from the first floor, thinking he would use a dummy or something like that. They were completely surprised when they realized that he was planning to jump himself. He jumped about 187 feet to his death in front of many witnesses. The event was actually recorded and remains one of the earliest existing footages of someone's death. Hans Steininger was an Austrian mayor of Brandau am Inn in the 16th century. He was famous for his incredibly long beard, which was around 4.5 feet long. To manage his beard, he kept it tucked in a pouch to prevent it from dragging on the ground or getting caught. In 1567, there was a fire at the town hall, which is where he slept, and in an attempt to escape, he tripped over his own beard and broke his neck and died. Charondas was an ancient Greek lawmaker from the city of Catania. He was known for his strict laws, which were created for maintaining order and civility in society. One of his most famous laws forbade anyone from bringing weapons into the Athenian assembly, with the punishment being death. He once returned from a hunting trip and accidentally entered the assembly while still carrying his hunting knife. He chose to uphold his own law by committing suicide. Sigurd the Mighty was a Viking chieftain and the first Earl of Orkney in the 9th century. Towards the end of his rule, he challenged another chieftain named Mael Brigti the Bucktooth to a battle with 40 men on each side. However, Sigurd actually brought 80 men to the battle. Mael Brigti was utterly defeated and beheaded. Sigurd fastened Mael Brigti's severed head to his saddle. As Sigurd rode, a large bucktooth from the severed head scraped his leg. The apparently harmless scratch became infested and festered, ultimately causing his death. Major John General Sedgwick was a Union Army officer during the American Civil War. In 1864, during the Battle of Spotsylvania Courthouse, Confederate snipers were shooting at Union soldiers from a distance of about 1,000 yards. Sedgwick's men were taking cover and he bashed them, saying, "What, men dodging this way for single bullets? What will you do when they open fire along the whole line?" His last words just before his death were, "They couldn't hit an elephant at this range." He was the highest-ranking Union officer to be killed in the war. Defenestration is a word that means the action of throwing someone out of a window. The Defenestration of Prague is a significant event that took place in the Kingdom of Bohemia in 1618. A group of Protestant nobles stormed Prague Castle and confronted two Catholic governors, Jaroslav Berida of Martinez and Willem Slavata of Chulam, along with their secretary, Philip Fabricius, and accused them of suppressing Protestant rights. In an act of defiance, the nobles threw the two governors and the secretary out of a third-floor window of the castle. The Defenestration of Prague is considered a direct cause of the Bohemian Revolt, which then caused the 30 Years' War, which is one of the most destructive conflicts in European history, leading to around 8 million deaths. Speaking of angry mobs, the De Witt brothers, Johann and Cornelis, were at the heights of their power during a period of political instability in the Dutch Republic. The De Witt brothers were accused of treason, mismanagement, and weak leadership during the crisis known as the Disaster Year in 1672. The brothers were dragged from their home, beaten and lynched. Their bodies were brutally mutilated and eaten by the mob. No one was ever prosecuted for this. John Henry Holliday was an American gambler, gunslinger, and dentist. He always thought he would die with his boots on, which means to be killed in a fight. He got tuberculosis, and in 1887, on his deathbed, he asked the nurse for a drink of whiskey. The nurse refused his request, and he looked at his bare feet and said, "This is funny," and then he died. In 1184, Henry VI, the Holy Roman Emperor, was hosting an important gathering of nobles at the citadel. The gathering was held in a large wooden building with a second-story floor, where many nobles were seated or standing during the assembly. The floor of the second story, which was made of wood, was not built to withstand the combined weights of the large crowd. The wooden structure collapsed under the pressure, and the nobles fell into the latrine cesspit below, and around 60 people drowned to death in liquid poop and filth. Dr. Robert Liston was nicknamed the fastest knife in the West. This speed was essential in an era before the availability of anesthesia. He is also the only surgeon in history to have a 300% mortality rate from a single operation. In 1847, as he rapidly sawed through the patient's leg in an amputation, his hand slipped, and he accidentally cut off the fingers of his assistant who was holding the patient down. During the immediate panic, one of the spectators was slashed by Robert's knife, which caused them to die of shock almost immediately. The patients and the assistants also ended up dying from infections, bringing the total death count to 3. Frank Hayes was a 22-year-old jockey who had never won a race before, and in 1923, he was riding a horse that was considered a 20-1 outsider, which means that it was unlikely to win. During the race, he died of a heart attack while still riding the horse. The horse ended up winning the race, and his death was only discovered after the horse crossed the finish line. This was Frank's only win in his entire career, and it happened after he died. According to ancient sources, Aeschylus was killed when an eagle dropped a tortoise on his head. The bird was trying to crack open the tortoise's hard shell, and the bird allegedly mistook Aeschylus's bald head for a rock. The tortoise was dropped from an immense height, and the impact killed him instantly. The way he died corresponds to him being a tragedian who wrote stories that often involve comedy and death. During the race at the Spa-Francorchamps circuit in Belgium in 1960, a British Formula One driver, Alan Stacey, was involved in a fatal car crash. During a difficult portion of the race that involves many high-speed corners, a bird came out of nowhere and hit Alan in the face. The blow caused him to lose control, and he crashed into a bank, sending his car into a spin. The crash occurred at a speed of about 120 miles per hour. He was pronounced dead shortly after attempts to revive him. Chrysippus was an ancient Greek Stoic philosopher. He was a huge advocate for logic, reason, and emotional restraint. He was a major figure who made large contributions to ethics, physics, and Stoicism. One day, he was watching a donkey eat some figs. Finding the sight funny, he jokingly told a servant to give the donkey some wine to help wash down the figs. The absurdity of the situation was so funny that it caused him to laugh so hard that he collapsed and died. The irony here is that he was a deeply influential Stoic figure who allegedly died from an emotional outburst. In 2023, not so long ago, an 82-year-old man named Shivdayal Sharma was pissing near train tracks in India when an express train hit a group of cows that had strayed onto the tracks. One of the cows was sent flying 100 feet into the air, and parts of it struck the unsuspecting man, killing him instantly. Another person nearby, also relieving himself at the time, narrowly avoided dying the same way.